When we think about good healthcare, our minds usually jump to things like the right diagnosis or the correct medicine, clinical safety. But what if one of the biggest factors in a patient's health has less to do with the procedure and more to do with the person? That's exactly what we're going to unpack today, the crucial concept of cultural safety in Australian healthcare. And let me tell you, this is about so much more than just being polite. It's literally about saving lives.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get to grips with the core problem, what's called the Health Equity Challenge. Then we'll introduce you to an amazing organization leading the charge, KATCNM. After that, we are going to define what cultural safety really means. From there, we'll see how it all plays out in the real world for a nurse, before we look ahead to what a truly culturally safe future could and should look like.
All right, first up, the Health Equity Challenge. Now, this isn't just some abstract idea from a textbook. We're talking about a genuine national priority. Let's really dig into why this is so important. And right here, this is really the non-negotiable starting point. The health gaps we see today didn't just appear out of nowhere. They are a direct result of history. Look, to have any chance of closing that gap, you absolutely have to start by acknowledging the deep and lasting impacts of colonization and systemic racism. Everything else we're going to talk about is built right on top of this foundation.
So, who's actually on the ground, pushing for this change? Well, that brings us right to our next section and a really key player in this story, KATCNM.
So, what is KATCNM? Think of them as the national peak body, the main voice for First Nations nurses and midwives across the country. And their mission? It's crystal clear. Improve health outcomes by weaving cultural safety into the very DNA of our healthcare system. So, how are they doing it? Well, they have a really smart four-part strategy. First, they work to recruit and keep more First Nations people in nursing. They push hard for cultural safety training to be a mandatory part of every nurse's education. They also team up with the big regulatory bodies, and, this is so important, they create practical tools that actually help, like their Murrumalingari program.
And this program is where the rubber really meets the road. This isn't just some vague workshop. It's a powerful three-step journey. Step 1 is all about understanding the history. Step 2 forces a hard look at the power dynamics that exist within the healthcare system itself. And then Step 3 is all about taking that critical knowledge and applying it directly to how you care for patients every single day.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of it all. What even is cultural safety? Here's a hint. It's not a checkbox you can just tick off. It's a journey, a whole continuum of care.
Let's walk through this journey together. It all starts with awareness, which is simply knowing that cultural differences exist. Then you move to sensitivity, which is about respecting those differences. That builds into competence, where you actually develop the skills to work effectively across cultures. But the final and honestly revolutionary step is cultural safety. This is where the whole power dynamic flips, and the focus shifts completely from what the provider's doing to what the patient is feeling.
If you remember one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. Cultural safety is an environment where a patient feels safe and respected. But here's the absolute game changer. It is defined by the patient. A nurse or a doctor can't just give themselves a pat on the back and say, "Yep, I was culturally safe." No way. The only person who gets to decide is the one receiving the care. Their experience is the only metric that matters.
Think of it like this. On one side, you've got clinical safety. That's defined by the healthcare provider, right? Did they perform the procedure correctly? It's a universal standard. But on the other side, you have cultural safety, and that is defined entirely by the patient. Did they feel safe and respected? It's deeply personal, it's contextual, and it recognizes that you simply cannot separate a person's identity from their health.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like on the ground in the day-to-day work of a nurse? Let's get super practical and look at a specific training unit for enrolled nurses, HLT ENN 044, which deals with chronic disease.
So just take a look at what's being asked of nurses here. It's not just about taking someone's blood pressure. It's about analyzing health info for diverse people, including First Nations people specifically. It's about understanding the full impact of a condition, not just the physical, but the emotional and social too. It's all about seeing and treating the whole person, not just the illness.
And yeah, these are the concrete things a nurse does, from helping with diabetic support to providing end-of-life care. But the key, the absolute key, is the lens of cultural safety. Is that insulin education being delivered in a way the patient actually trusts and understands?
Is the palliative care plan aligned with their spiritual beliefs and family values? That is cultural safety in action.
All right, let's bring it all home and zoom out to the big picture, a culturally safe future. This is all about connecting the actions of one nurse in one clinic to transforming our entire health system. You know, for decades, we thought that a great doctor or nurse was all about technical skill. How well can they place an IV? How sharp are their diagnostic skills? But a huge and growing body of evidence and countless personal stories are telling us something really clearly. Clinical skill by itself is not enough. It just can't close the equity gap.
So what's the missing piece? It's a socially aware workforce. We need healthcare professionals who understand history, who see the power dynamics at play, and who get the context of their patients' lives. A workforce that sees the person in front of them not as a collection of symptoms, but as a human being with a story, a culture, and a community. Because at the end of the day, that's the real goal, isn't it? Not just providing treatments, but achieving true equity. A system where every single person has the opportunity to achieve their best possible health. And cultural safety? Well, it isn't just one way to get there, it is the way.
So, I'm going to leave you with a question, something to really chew on. This whole explainer, it really boils down to one fundamental powerful shift, moving from the provider's perspective to the patient's perspective. So the question is, how can we, in our own jobs, in our own communities, help make sure that the patient's definition of safety becomes the absolute, non-negotiable standard for all care?